also attended Pondok Pesantren Darun Najah, which is an Islamic boarding school in Jakarta, Indonesia. And alhamdulillah, he currently served as the imam and the Islamic studies teachers at Masjid At-Tohir in Los Angeles. He does various community work there. He's the teacher within the community. Alhamdulillah. And without further honest.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for this moderator here, Brother Haris, for giving me a very extended introduction on my part. Alhamdulillah. It's a pleasure to be with everyone here. It's truly an honor to be in the presence of everyone here because this topic, it stems from the faith of how it really is towards the calling of what meaning is, or how we find what truth is, or what reality is. Right? And so I would have a good opinion that there are more people that are experienced with this in terms of seeing how that would go into their daily lives. And for those that have been born Muslim, perhaps our experience with Islam is somewhat different for those that accepted Islam at a later age, right? And so that's something that we're going to kind of navigate and kind of discover through, inshallah, about the idea of da'wah and how that works in our day-to-day, inshallah. So we'll start with that, inshallah. So the idea of da'wah right here, I think in some minds of what da'wah comes into question is like, you have stereotypically, has anyone heard of like da'wah stands? So like, for example, we have Why Islam, or like, some other like Muslim orgs, they set up a stand and they have different pamphlets, they have Qur'ans, they have translations of Qur'ans, they might have like a reciter, reading some Qur'an, so on and so forth. And then like perhaps someone would come to a booth, they're like interested in that, and you have someone give them a pamphlet, explain some things, and that's their end towards that kind of connection towards what perhaps they perceive of what Islam is, right? Just building off of that in terms of what that kind of modern sense of like da'wah is in today's time, we could look back, how da'wah is connected, and to even break down what da'wah even means in the first place. Da'wah itself, from the Arabic, is a call, an invitation to something on the linguistic level, right? So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَادْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ, right? The idea is that Allah says, call upon me and I answer you. Call upon me and I answer you. There's also, the basis of da'wah itself, of the invitation, أُدْعُوا إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ. Call towards the path of your God, bil hikmah, with the idea here comes into understanding that it's wisdom, right? And so we're going to explore what wisdom is. What does it mean to be wise with this? Wal maw'idha al hasana, and advice that is sound, that is good, that is, it comes from the word ihsan, something as beautiful, so beautiful advice as well. So we're going to explore these things in terms of da'wah. What was the da'wah like of the Prophet ﷺ, right? What was the mission? What was the kind of the whole crux of the mission of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Was it just to get the quantity of Muslims to come in folds and to call it a day? Perhaps, we see the da'wah booth that we have, and, it might, for some, it might be a bit stern on a critique towards how we do da'wah these days. This is what I learned from Dr. Sherman Jackson, where he would say, perhaps, during the Prophet's time, did he once he received the revelation of Iqra, the revelation of read in the name of your Lord and so forth, did he go out into the public and quote unquote put up a da'wah stand and give a pamphlet, explain a little bit of Islam and call it a day? Right? Something to really think about in terms of the way we do da'wah is that it's the approach that was there. So we think about who the Prophet was with the people at that time. We see towards how that process of da'wah itself, he was calling to Allah for the people. 13 years in Mecca and 10 years in Medina, 23 years together. It's a process. We're thinking to that, right? When you think about 10 years, 13 years for people that were they were very antagonistic, even though they were close relatives towards the Prophet, right? So something to really think about the idea of da'wah in terms of our daily kind of like day to day, when we're living, when we're being with people, when we're being with our coworkers, when we're being with families, we're being with strangers, perhaps, is that there's something beyond the information that we relay. It's about the connection that we have. As I was saying, it's the connection before the correction, right? And we talked about that a bit as well. There's a post which I really like about that kind of idea by Sheikh Adiyinka Mendes. So he says, the primary role of a scholar is not to correct you. The primary role of a scholar is to connect you. So if we think about that, correction versus connection. And he explains further, to connect you to nature, to connect you to your highest self, to connect you to your believing ancestors, to connect you to your spiritual family, to connect you to the healing wisdom of the Quran, to connect you to the living light of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So like, we think about these things, these ideas of like what comes into play, unfortunately, when our spaces, we have at the masjid. We wish to have a masjid that is, quote unquote, a place of safety and security, a place where it's very welcoming, very inviting. I've had, after I gave one khutbah once, a Colombian brother, mashallah, he came by and he asked the question, is it normal for me to think that, I go, like, he used to go to the church and whatnot, and he, like, everyone over there was very welcoming, he was well received, like, come on, we have service, and so on and so forth, right? Very welcoming. But then with his experience unfortunately with Islamic centers and masjids, at his level, at his personal kind of experience, it was very the opposite of that, unfortunately. Right? So something that the Prophet had, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was that, he received the revelation, okay, God is one. Pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognize that what you're doing in terms of these deities are off the track, and this is a materialistic world. You have to look beyond this life. There's a hereafter, and all of these things, all of these values that are inculcated within the Quranic narrative. But what was something that was perhaps overlooked by us in terms of us and how we do da'wah today, in terms of that formalized da'wah booth, perhaps, is the idea of connection before correction. So, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, companions would say about him that he would teach us faith before the Quran. Right? Again, this is like something of an observation and a reflection upon how the emphasis that we have is very strong on the Quran, because we know the importance of the Quran. We know how it's of its miraculous nature, of it being God's literal words. But the fact that the Sahabas would say that the beginning stages of even when the Quran was being revealed, they were taught the idea of faith, of Iman, of how to really, and faith in its entirety, Iman, is the connection that we have with the divine presence, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That's something that we're trying to aim, inshallah, with the essence of da'wah. The essence of da'wah right there is not about correcting, you're wrong, I'm right. It's it's my way or the highway, but to really bring hearts closer towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It's to bring that connection through. He continues on and says that faith is all about connection, right? Because faith is the connection between us and the Prophet ﷺ towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? There's that connecting line. Right? He would teach them faith, not creed, not doctrine, not dogma, but faith. Right? And so, like he says also in sales, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right? And so, in terms of marketing, for those that have been in marketing and like you have people knocking on your doors and trying to quote unquote hustle you with things, there's a way with words, and the impression is that they really care for us. Right? And so the similar idea comes into place where there's concern. There's prophetic concern for the betterment of the other, right there. Right. So unfortunately, some experience that we also face within our Muslim spaces is the idea of Dr. Sherman Jackson. I quote again. He says this thing about the gotcha Islam. Gotcha Islam. So you catch some. So for example, you see someone in a row and then they're not wearing something properly or whatnot, or you have a sister and they're doing something off and so forth, and the only interaction that you had with them is at that moment. Oh, why are you doing this? You're supposed to wear it like this. Oh, why are you wearing that? You're supposed to do this. Oh, you're in the mosque, you're supposed to do that. Right? That gotcha Islam unfortunately becomes the only perception of religiosity that perhaps someone might have. Right? The idea is that like I'm always in the fault, I'm always in the wrong. Whereas the prophetic way of the Prophet ﷺ was when a drunkard came to the Prophet ﷺ. Right? And so someone who's drinking, did the Prophet say astaghfirullah, what are you doing? That's something that we hear in our communities, like because astaghfirullah, unfortunately, it becomes into the idea of like what should be the case is that you are recognizing that I have fault, O Allah, and I want to seek your forgiveness. But it becomes a weaponization of the religion to the fact that I guilt tripped you so that you have shame, Right? Unfortunately, that comes into play. But the Prophet ﷺ was not like that, right? He didn't guilt trip people towards what was good. So that person, that drunkard, or that person that was thinking of committing adultery, right? Did he guilt trip that person? No, he didn't. Right? So he heard their case. Some Sahabas, they mocked that drunkard, and the Prophet said, "Don't curse him, for he loves Allah and His Messenger." So the idea is to really encourage and to see where the people are at, and to have a listening mind in terms of being there with the idea of da'wah instead. Right? So that comes into mind in terms of like what da'wah is. It's about connecting people to the truth. It's about connecting people to what is real. It's about connecting people to a more sense of meaning beyond this world, beyond the material, towards what the unseen is, and so forth. So, in terms of practical ways of doing da'wah and extracting from the prophetic way, was that it was a way of concern, it was a way of care, it was a way of sacrifice as well. You have narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, during his lifetime, he would not go through hunger strikes, but he would go to drastic measures of where, he opens his stomach and it shows he's tying two rocks just to hold his hunger, because he's giving away, giving food to those that are in need, right? So the idea of concern is very alive in there. So two things that come across from this is that the idea of to really connect before you correct. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, he was known within the community as the trustworthy, as the honest, right? And he came along with the other tribes as well to uphold this specific covenant called the Hilf al-Fudul, which was even before his prophethood. He would join arms together towards stopping oppression or injustice that would happen towards any tribe, because before that, it's very the situation where there was very, I would say, gang-like. The idea of asabiya is that you're with a tribe, whatever you do is that it's going to be connected with that tribe. If you go through if someone does wrong to you, we're going to do wrong to them. Right? Very gang-like in that sense. And so the Prophet, he recognized that. He did not, through his spreading of the message and telling people about Islam, did not, quote unquote, wreck the system down in terms of how they understood the family structures, the tribal structures, but he worked with that, right? And so something to really think about beyond the da'wah that we have today is how are we working with these structures that we have in our society today. There's something very small about the concern, or not actually small, but something a very minute detail. When I was just researching up on this, and I remember coming up into a story of Imam Zaid Shakir. He comes into a conference like this, Mu'tamar conference as well. And so he has a student, Sidi Osama Khannan. He's shadowing him. He wants to learn from his teacher. So Imam Zaid, he's making wudu. And we know how like wudu happens at, conferences or public areas. It becomes like SeaWorld pretty much, where the water works, right? I think the sisters they have like a swimming session. But like it becomes the waterworks, right? And so Imam Zaid Shakir, Sidi Osama Khannan, he notices that Imam Zaid, after he does his wudu, he takes paper towels, he wipes it down the sink, and he wipes, wherever it was wet and whatnot. And, afterwards, Sidi Osama Khannan, he asks Imam Zaid, why'd you do that for? There's going to be people cleaning that already. Right? And so his answer was like, it's so that, it can make, I want to make things easy for my Latino brothers and sisters. Right? So the idea that there's meticulous concern for the other, which is really, really important in terms of how we spread, or even not just through information, but the way we are. Right? There's a saying as well that the tongue, by the Arabs, the tongue of the state is more eloquent than the tongue of the statements. We could speak on and on and on about how Islam is, how the religion is, how God is one, and all this and that and this and that and so forth. But the way we are as acting Muslims, as believers, actions speak louder than words, right? And that's something that, I always hear, when I was over in Egypt, or even from the Western students over there from America, from the US and the UK. They always say like, mashallah, students from like Southeast Asia, they have mashallah akhlaq and this and that, everything. And so that impression is prophetic, right? It's something that carries on. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ had within him in terms of dealing with others, right? So the idea of connection before correction is also the idea of love before the lesson, right? Love before the lesson. Do you really have concern for that other person that you're talking to? Do you really care for that person? Or is it just like, I just sent the message and call it a day, right? The Prophet ﷺ with some random lady that comes across to him, and she says, in Medina, Medina's a small city, but still, it wasn't mentioned about her name or whatnot. She asks, Rasulullah ﷺ, I have an issue that I want to clear out. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he says, yeah, we can go to the side on the street and we can talk it through. Right? So this was someone like, not a notable, but someone, some random person, that perhaps a stranger, perhaps that we might meet, and how we treat with them. Um, those are just some notions towards what we think about in terms of the idea of da'wah, the idea of how Islam is spread through. Um, like, for example, something also very minute as well. This right here, it's a rosary, it's a tasbih, sibha, prayer beads, whatever you want to call it. Something very interesting that came upon me was that you have these in many Muslim civilizations, Muslim cultures, and whatnot. There's a story as well. Imam Daniel Hernandez, he was wearing these, and then he went to an IHOP for like a breakfast, to catch some breakfast over there. And so the waitress, she noticed this. She noticed this, and she asked about it. What's this about, and whatnot, and so forth. And so he didn't say anything about Islam or anything, right? On the offset, like he didn't go and say, "Oh, be Muslim," at that extent, right? But just something very small towards like the sibha, where she asked about it, and he said that, okay, this is to help me. It's like a counter for me to remember God, inshallah, and like to remember God in all affairs, right? We say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah. You glorify God, you praise God, you're thankful of God, and you make God great, and so forth. Just a conversation from that and onwards. She took her shahada after that. Right? So these small things that we think are very minuscule in terms of what da'wah is and how we are as a people, the way we talk, the way we walk, how we deal with things, how we deal with time, all of these things have greater impact to someone, right? In the search for meaning, in the search for what is truth. Alhamdulillah. Right? So that's that wisdom that we're looking for in terms of yeah, that's the wisdom that we're looking for, inshallah, with ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. Your Lord with wisdom. And so the wisdom here is that the Prophet, again, he didn't divorce himself from who he was. Ana Arabi, Ana Qurashi. He was an Arab. He was a Qurayshi. He owned it. He wholeheartedly took that into core, and he brought that towards the Quraysh. Right? And so, like, there's a Sahaba as well. I think it's Abu Darda or Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. He goes up, becomes Muslim. So this Sahaba is like, like the zeal is real, right? He wants to spread this as much as he can. He wants to spread it to everyone. He goes up to a specific place where many people gather to hear announcements in the town of Mecca, and so he spreads that kind of this is Islam. We worship one God, and so on and so forth. But the Qurayshis over there, they're saying, who's that person? We don't recognize him. They're like, this is like a nobody right here, right? And then so the Prophet, he came to that person and said that, perhaps someone that had a closer lineage to the Quraysh, for example, Omar or Uthman, would be a better suit towards that, right? So the idea that, there's a time and place for things, and also, perhaps the way we are, with people, and am I the right person for this, right? Am I the right person for this? So inshallah, we'll end it here. I think two things that we could just kind of a takeaway out of all of this is to really have that connection before the correction, and it's to have the love before the lesson, inshallah. And that's something that we can take away in terms of how we move around in this world, inshallah, with the prophetic mission, right? Because it is something that's very heavy, right? It's connect because us as Muslims, we're connected to the Prophet and we're connected to Allah, so it's something that's very heavy. But with this, inshallah, the way we deal with people, how the hotel, like what's their feedback with us being here, that's something to really think about, right? That in a sense is da'wah on its own. This whole mu'tamar is like a da'wah in a sense, right? If we're conducting ourselves properly, they'll see to it like, oh, okay, there's Muslims here, they're doing something. Are they messing around, or is there something that, something special, something that intrigued them, right? So that's some things to really think about in terms of the way we conduct with da'wah in our daily lives, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan, and may the way we do da'wah be a way of love and compassion towards all, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan.
Connect what Brother Aaron said, connection before correction, and how do we connect through the concerns of others, the little actions that we do, and all just being a Muslim. Yeah. Inshallah, right now it's around 11:57. I think we have just one question. If anybody have like a question that they want to ask, if not, oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I'll just say out loud. So I have a question. From this entire speech, you were talking about how it's important for us to make them feel the connection rather than coercion, like, oh, you're doing this wrong, doing this right, and we understand that. But when is it the right time to actually tell them to correct them? Because I mean, like in that sense, then they always can feel it, but they'll always be doing something different. We live in such a society these days.
Thank you for the question. That's really relevant in terms of how we can conduct it. There's a specific incident with the Prophet ﷺ. He goes, he's with some of the Sahabas, and what happens is that, it's in the Prophet's masjid, right? Masjid Nabawi. We think about Masjid Nabawi right now. Inshallah, it's all grand and everything. And back in the day, it was very simple, right? And so you have a Bedouin that comes along, some stranger, and they do a number one. They do a little tinkle in the masjid, right? And you think to yourself, if someone does that at your local masjid, if someone does that, at the musalla here, how would we react?
Go ballistic.
Yeah, we'd try to, call the security and get all the Muslims to jump them. Jihad. Alhamdulillah. But what was the reaction to that situation? The Prophet ﷺ, the Sahabas, they had the same reaction that we would have had as well. They wanted to jump him, right? And rightfully so. Kind of this, the sacredness and all that. But the Prophet said, hold on, hold your horses. Give him a minute to finish. So they didn't tell him to he didn't go straight to it, but let him finish. Let him finish his deed. Right? And then the Prophet ﷺ came up and told the Sahaba to wash that off and so forth, and told that Bedouin about the space of worship and so on and so forth. Right? I feel like that's something that can really relate to in terms of the idea of connecting to that person. So again, that example of how would you feel if someone told you off at the masjid when you never knew who that person was, right? So it's something that we're like, okay, for example, if it was a friend and you're connected to a degree, you can talk about these things, and that's where the connection happens, right? So again, how connected you are, it depends on that, and that's case to case, right? And so, inshallah, that connection that you build is very important. And that's what the Prophet had with the people. They knew who he was. He was trusted. So, the idea of trust is there. Do people trust you with that? Is it a place of safety where you can share your thoughts, or you're going to be judged straight and say, astaghfirullah, Because unfortunately that's what happens in our situation, where we need to really have those terms change towards what they really mean, right? What astaghfirullah really means shouldn't be a guilt trip, but it should be where you're recognizing that I have faults of Allah and this is what I'm using this for. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much.
We'll end our session here. It's 12 o'clock local time. But if you guys have any more questions, you can catch Brother Anis anywhere. He'll be around. He'll answer your questions, inshallah. We'll go ahead and close the session. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالحق. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And today, I believe the prayer dhuhr is right now. So, inshallah, we'll make it to the prayer.